Hello, I'm Dr. Erik Dewey, and I study how I can use games to help people learn. And in a previous video, I talked about a bunch of games that are great fun for the kids with some learning built into it. And I got a couple of comments about, well, what about games for couples, for adults? And so I'm back here with a list of a bunch of games. I've broken it into 3 categories, kind of an increasing complexity of the games. So let's take a look. So for the first category, we're going to start with some classics. The first one I'm going to tackle, of course, is a good one, Scrabble. A great crossword game. Obviously, you get more points with harder to use letters. It is a game that rewards a better vocabulary. So if one of the pair of you is much better in vocabulary, they're going to be much better in Scrabble. And so if that's the case, or if you're looking for something other than Scrabble, I'm a big fan of this one, Letter Tycoon. And in this game, what you're actually doing is you're trying to spell words with a hand of cards, but afterwards you actually get to buy certain letters. And if anyone uses those letters in the future, you get points. And it just is a neat kind of way to, if someone is making a big word with the X, you get a bonus out of it. So Letter Tycoon is a great place if you want a great game if you want to play instead of Scrabble. Another classic, and as you can tell, we've had this one in our house for a long time, is Othello. A great game where you're attempting to get the most of your color pieces, but every time you place a piece, anything you surround gets flipped to your color. So you may be behind, and in one flip, you're suddenly ahead of everything. A newer game, this one just came out last year, is a game called Ganz schön clever, or That's Pretty Clever. Obviously a German game. It's very much like Yahtzee, except there's a lot of neat flexibility. Different colored dice are used and they allow you to score in different ways, and you try to balance that out as much as possible. It's a quick, fun game. It's a great kind of interesting way to play because when they're dice that you don't use, your opponents get to use those dice. So there's some good decisions to make there as well. Another one is Lost Cities. Now this is an older copy. The newer ones look a little bit different. But in this game, you are just trying to complete the most excavations. There's 5 sort of archaeological excavations. Basically, they're cards numbered 1 through 10. And what you're trying to do is put them in numerical order. And you get points added up to the value of those cards. So if you had 1, 3, and 5, you would end up with 9 points. The catch is if you start an expedition, you automatically start in a negative area, a negative points. And so you have to kind of take that gamble. Am I going to be able to get enough cards to make this worthwhile? Or is my opponent going to get some of the cards? A really great one-on-one sort of fun game. The last one that I want to talk about in this first section is Codenames Duet. Now Codenames came out a few years ago. It's an amazingly great group game. Where you're trying to get people to guess the code names of your spies by giving a one-word clue that can lead to their code names. The problem with code names is obviously that you can't play a 2-player game, and the CGE realized that and created Codenames Duet, which actually captures almost the exact same gameplay but allows you to play 2 players. And what's a lot of fun is if you play it a lot as 2 players, you end up kind of referencing things that only you would know. Okay, for the second level, and these are a little bit more complex, but certainly nothing to be concerned about. We're going to start with a classic in the cooperative genre, and that is Pandemic. And in Pandemic, you are all working together to stop, obviously, a pandemic. And you basically move around the world trying to cure diseases and try and find a vaccine. It's cooperative, it's a little bit challenging, it's a lot of fun as a couple. If the theme of Pandemic doesn't really fit your mood, or if it just seems something not quite your style, there's another game called Forbidden Island, which is almost identical to Pandemic in gameplay. It's a little simpler, where you're exploring a sinking island and you're trying to get all of these treasures and get off the island before it sinks. Again, another great cooperative game. If that doesn't sound good, in that same series is Forbidden Desert. And in this case, you've crash landed in the middle of a desert and you're trying to explore to find these pieces to a device that will let you fly away. It's mechanically different than Forbidden Island and Pandemic, but it is very similar in the feel and is a lot of fun as a couple. The next game which I don't have the box for right now, is a game called Horrified. And this is where you are trying to stop the universal monsters. So Dracula, the Wolfman, the Invisible Man, Frankenstein's monster and his bride. So you're a group of people running around this town trying to save the villagers and also defeat these monsters. It's a light but very fun and challenging game, which also has a lot of flexibility because you pick different monsters and different characters to play. The next one, and this is a fun little two-player game, is a game called Patchwork. And in it, you are trying to complete a quilt, and your opponent is trying to do the same. And you are bidding on these various pieces. They're shaped kind of like Tetris pieces that you will then fit on a square quilt. And you end up scoring points for that matter. So you're trying to race around, get the pieces you need, try and keep your opponent from getting the pieces they need. And it's, first of all, it's a very unique theme. I don't think I've ever played a quilting game before other than this one. And the pieces and the gameplay is quick, fun, and really a lot of interesting decisions. So the last game we're talking about is, this is the It game from last year. It came out and the manufacturers have had to go back and constantly reprint it. So it comes in and out of print. Its list price, I want to say, is like $65. So certainly don't buy it if it's more than that. Just wait. They'll create another print run for it. But this is the game. It's called Wingspan. So in Wingspan, what you're trying to do, you're a birder and you're trying to lure birds into your sort of field area and score some points. You're kind of building an engine by bringing in these birds, and you have to get food to lure the birds in, and then the birds will lay eggs, which you can then use and get points, and you can also get more birds to kind of bring them in. There's a lot of pieces. Don't get nervous by the number of pieces in the game, because it's a very simple flowing game, and it comes with what they call the Swift Start Pack, where it basically steps out. This is what you want to do for your first couple of turns, so it kind of steps you through the game real easily. It's a beautiful game. There's so many neat components on it. It's a relaxing game, and it's a lot of fun to play. So if you're looking for just a very different type of game to play as a couple or with multiple people, Wingspan is a great way to go. Thanks. Okay, now on to the third level, the most complex games. And don't get scared. These are not that complicated. They're just more complex than the earlier ones. The first one I want to start talking about is Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. And this is what's called a deck builder game. And in it, you start with a small deck of cards, and as you play, you get to add more cards to your deck, thus building the deck. Now, this is obviously a Harry Potter themed game. It's based off of the movies, and in it, you are trying to stop the various villains from the different Harry Potter movies. And what's real interesting is that you start with the first movie, so you're going to fight against the evil professor in there. And then after you've completed that, you open up a new box that adds more stuff from the second movie. And you just keep adding things and opening boxes until you get to the seventh and the last movie, and then you're fighting off Voldemort. This is one of those weird games where it's actually harder with more players and a little bit easier with just 2 players. And it's just, if you like Harry Potter at all, the deck building is fun. The adding to your deck slowly so you kind of ramp up into what's going on is a lot of fun. And it's just a well done game. Now, if you happen to be of the mystery genre bent, then there are some great games to help you solve mysteries. The first one I'll talk about is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. There's actually a series of these games. This one happens to deal with Jack the Ripper and some other stories, but there are at least 2 other games that have different mysteries. And in it, you are just going to try and solve the mystery. So there's newspaper clippings, there's a map of London, there's you go to different buildings, you ask and talk to people about it and try and solve whatever the mystery is. The catch is you're chasing Sherlock Holmes. He's also going to solve this mystery. So at the end, you look and see how well you did, how quickly you did it versus how quickly Sherlock Holmes does it. So you want to try and solve the crime with as little steps as possible. Now, spoiler alert, you're not going to beat Sherlock Holmes. He's always going to do it in the most efficient path possible. But it is still fun to try and figure out, look at clues in the newspapers and what people say and try and solve these different mysteries. If Sherlock Holmes isn't your bent, you like something a little more modern, there's this game that came out last year called Chronicles of Crime. And this is a real fascinating game. It uses a smartphone, and what you're basically doing, again, is solving a crime. So you are going through and you get the crime, and you have all these cards, and on the cards are little QR codes. And so there may be cards of people, or maybe cards of things found in the crime scene. And so what you do is when you want to question a person, you slide it under your phone's camera. It scans that QR code and tells you what that person tells you. And so you use that to kind of follow along in the different areas trying to track down and solve these crimes. The other thing that's really fun about it is when you are in a new location, you pick up the phone and you sort of look around, and as you move the phone physically, it allows you to look around in the location. And you just start calling out things like, oh, I see a knife, I see a journal, I see index cards. And the other player or players are digging through trying to find cards that match those things that are seen. And once again, you scan them and get information about it. You are on a time limit. You've got to solve this crime before you run out of time. And so once you do, you attempt to solve it, you see if you win, and you move on to the next crime. Great deductive reasoning and a lot of fun. If you want to commit crimes instead of solving them, then I would suggest Burgle Bros. This is a great little game. Think of Ocean's 11, where you're putting together a series of criminals and you're going to break into these safes to retrieve the loot and try and escape from the helipad before the security guards catch you. So the board will be laid out to where this is the building with some walls, and you're exploring the building as the security guards are roaming around each floor. And so you want to move around quickly and try and find the treasure that you're searching for without tripping alarms, because if you trip alarms, more guards will come towards you quicker, and eventually you can try and escape. Each of the players that you have in here allows you to have a special ability. And so not only is the game fun with just 2 players, it's fun with multiple players, but it also has a lot of replayability because you can try different character combinations out. So Burgle Bros, a lot of fun. All right, you're saying, Eric, these are all great, but I really just want to go head to head with my opponent. We want a really true test of skill. And for that, I bring you Twilight Struggle. This was the #1 game on Board Game Geek, which is the biggest database about board games in the internet. It was #1 for a long time. It basically simulates the Cold War, so it's going to be USA versus the USSR from the 50s all the way up to the fall of the Soviets. And it's a card-driven game, so in your hand you're going to have cards, and they're going to be all kinds of different historical events, and you will play them to try and gain more influence in different countries around the world. And then periodically you're going to score, oh, maybe this time Europe's going to score or Asia's going to score. So whoever has the most of countries in those areas will then get points. What's really delicious about this game is the fact that a lot of times the cards that you play are going to be good for your opponent. And so you've got to try and mitigate what your opponent can do. The other thing that's amazing about this game is that every one of those cards has information in it about the actual historical event in the rule book. So if you've ever wondered what the Suez Canal crisis was, for instance, or the Israel-Arab wars, you can look it up in the rule book and it will tell you those kinds of things. So not only do you have a lot of fun playing, but you also learn a lot as well. Interesting thing about this game is that at the beginning, the Soviets have the advantage, so they're going to earn more points. But as the game progresses, you start hitting the 70s and the 80s, it starts skewing back over to America. So you just have a lot of fun trying to figure out who's going to win this particular Cold War. So there you have it. 3 different sets of games. There should be about 14 of them total that are great to play with couples. If there are other games that you would like to play that I didn't mention, certainly mention them in the comments or send me a note and we can talk about them. So I appreciate you listening. Thank you. I'm Dr. Erik Dewey.